Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my stuff at joehaggerty.substack.com, and I encourage you to take the premium membership where you can read more of the stuff that I write about the Boston Bruins in the NHL. Post something just about every day during the week. With me today, first time on the Pucks with Haggs podcast, Boston.com's Conor Ryan. Conor, thanks very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
How's your summer been?
Pretty good. Pretty low key now that we've gotten past the waves of retirements and all those things. I think Bruins fans are probably traumatized after this summer. I think it's starting to wind down a little bit. I think, as you said, the summer is ending now. Summer camp's over. We're starting to get back into the swing of things. I'm looking forward to it, Joe. It's no more of waiting through the summer and seeing what's next for the Bruins. We finally get to training camp, see what goes on moving forward. So
yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it too. It has been a little bit of sort of pain this summer, a little more than usual with the retirements and some longtime standbys going on. One thing that's not painful is the sponsors for the show. Let's thank them really quick. FanDuel Sportsbook, as always, exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. We always got to give them tons of props, especially with football season coming up now that hockey season's around the corner as well. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston. Start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. And Factor Meals, not only a pitchman, also a client. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, ready in 2 minutes or less. If you really want to hurry it up in the microwave, but head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. Delicious meals. I've had a bunch of them: pork chops, Indian butter chicken, which was phenomenal. A bunch of different stuff, very healthy and also delicious. So factormeals.com, they're my friend. They should be yours too. All right, Conor, let's jump right into this. First biggest news item with the Bruins over the last week, and I'm sure you would love to talk about this. A former BU product, another one coming to the Bruins, Alex Chiasson. This is a guy that the Bruins, count up those Terriers. There's a lot of them. There's like a Terriers mafia going on right now.
There you go.
This is a guy that the Bruins have liked for a long time, going back to when they had the Tyler Seguin trade in 2013. That was a guy they were trying to get from Dallas. I think they ended up settling for Matt Fraser instead, but the guy they really liked was Alex Chiasson. We've heard his name a couple of times associated with the Bruins. Makes sense. He's a power play guy. He's a big winger, 6'4". He's been fairly productive if you look at him as like kind of a third line sort of option for your NHL roster. Was with the Red Wings a little bit of last season, about 20 games or so. Just your take on this here on a PTO, which is a tryout agreement during training camp, so no guarantees he gets a roster spot. But how do you think he fits into the mix going into training camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the Bruins, you're just looking to kind of stockpile that forward depth and looking for, leaving no stone unturned when it comes to looking at adding depth to this team. Doesn't hurt to bring in a guy like him on a PTO. As you said, he's a bit of a journeyman. He's been around quite a bit, but wherever he's gone, he's been pretty productive in terms of what his role is. If you're looking for just a third or a fourth line guy that you can kind of pencil in on the net front on the power play, maybe on the second power play unit, and generate some offense, it's worth giving a flyer on a guy like that, as you said, has been linked to the Bruins before. They like him and they like his skill set as a guy who's 6'3", 6'4", can be productive in those roles. So if you're looking for a guy just to add to that competition, that's one thing that feels like every training camp, whenever, Don Sweeney has his press conference to lead off training camp, it's always talking about internal competition. Something they always talk about every year going into camp. So adding a guy like Chiasson into the mix who can kind of further push other guys, add competition to maybe some of the younger guys into the lineup, doesn't hurt if you're the Bruins if you can bring that guy into the mix and seeing what you really have in him.
Yeah, and one other ththing I like about this is I think they did need to bring maybe another forward or two in because of James Van Riemsdyk, his recent history. A lot of injuries, has missed a lot of time. Let's say he gets banged up in training camp and isn't ready to start the year. I think you have your hedge your bets a little bit if you have a guy like Alex Chiasson around that you can plug into a winger spot. And, maybe you have to rearrange the deck chairs a little bit to make it work with him if Van Riemsdyk is out. But that's one of the things I've kind of looked at with this Bruins plan and the guys that they've brought in is that unless they had some other options, some other veteran options, and in a pinch, he could certainly play a second line winger role. Let's say JVR starts the year there, gets hurt, something happens, and you want to bring a guy like this in. I think it's good to have that kind of insurance in case injuries hit at the wing spots, where having traded Taylor Hall, having lost some other players in free agency, maybe your depth is not, as far as NHL players go, what it once was. And this is a guy you bring in and would give you instant depth if you can keep him around after training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something where you look at just the Bruins giving themselves options. As soon as that, they announced the PTO deal, you have people worried about like, oh, the Bruins are, if there's any year where you're bringing up some younger players to, fight for a spot in the lineup, it's this year and you're signing these veteran guys. It's like, well, have those guys earn it, right? Everyone wants to talk about a guy like Fabian Lysell or these guys that, of course, everyone is intrigued by them. They're these kind of shiny new prospects that you hope can crack a spot on the roster, but it's not a guarantee, right? You need someone to push them throughout these games. You can't just give a guy like Lysell, the expectation going into it that he's going to seize one of those spots and just hope it happens. You need some of these veteran guys like Chiasson who can push them. And if Lysell can put together a really strong camp, a good preseason, and fight for those spots, that's great. He's earned it. But I think it's important to have these veteran guys up there that if these younger guys don't step up, the spot's there. And I think Chiasson, it's not like he's this like project or this guy that's a fringe player. Like he's kind of proven at these various stops that you put him in a certain role, he's going to produce. So there's value in that, especially if you're the Bruins, you're signing him to a PTO deal.
Yeah, and I think Merkulov has become the trendy guy now with the Bruins fans that they think is going to win a spot and all of a sudden push for it. I think, Lysell has lost a little bit of the luster in, the last year and a half or so. Like, obviously still talented, was a former first-round pick, but it seems like coming off a year where Merkulov was second in the AHL in rookie scoring, definitely, showed a lot of promise, was one of Providence's best players. He's almost becoming that sort of it prospect now where they're pinning a lot of hopes on. But I'm with you. And we actually have a question from a fan we're going to get to a little bit later on Twitter that kind of encapsulates that feeling that you're talking about and that sentiment pretty perfectly. But Alex Chiasson, I think there's no downside with a guy like this. Do you foresee any other potential PTO kind of guys? I'd thrown a few out there a couple of weeks ago. Paul Stastny was one that maybe made potential sense because he can play center. He's a veteran guy. He's a good two-way player. But any, and center, I thought was somewhere they may bring somebody in a PTO, just given the players that they have right now, and throwing another player into that mix certainly wouldn't hurt, even though you've got Jesper Boquist, Morgan Geekie, Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle. Certainly Trent Frederick could factor into that. Mark McLaughlin, Johnny Beecher. There's a lot of guys right now that are going to be in the mix for possible center spots going into training camp. Do you foresee any other PTOs at this point with training camp around the corner?
Yeah, I think if you're the Bruins, you're trying to stockpile as much depth as you can. So I think Stastny's a guy that makes a lot of sense if you're just looking for any more additional help down the middle. It's something where, as you said, there are plenty of options to turn to, but is it kind of clear cut where those guys are going to fall into the lineup or which guys can kind of perform in those set roles? So I think if you're the Bruins and you have the ability to bring in a few more guys, it doesn't hurt as you're trying to figure out where exactly these guys fall into the lineup. Like, I think people have talked about a guy like Geekie as someone who could probably produce more in regular minutes. But other than that, like you're looking at, a Patrick Brown or, even younger players, Johnny Beach or what have you. If you're looking for a set spot further down the lineup, guy like Stastny, who again has kind of carved out a role as a pretty dependable third, fourth line center, doesn't hurt bringing them in if you have the opportunity to do it. So I think, targeting guys down the middle on PTO deals seems like a smart move just to round out what's already a pretty deep forward core in terms of just the amount of various ways they can kind of tinker with this lineup going into training camp.
Yeah, they definitely have numbers. There's no question about that. It's just a matter of how these guys are going to fit and how well they're going to perform. Geekie, to your point, I think they definitely have high hopes for him.
Yeah.
That he's going to produce more in perhaps a bigger role with a few more minutes than what he was playing with before, and that he can still elevate his game, and he's not quite at a finished product at the NHL level. We'll see though. When you start projecting all these guys into greater roles, bigger things, you're reaching a little bit, or you're asking for more. You're not necessarily going to get, and you better be prepared if you don't get what you think you're going to get. It's the same with Charlie Coyle and Zacha. They're going to be elevating into roles too that are beyond what they've done in the past, and they're going to be asked to do more this year than they've ever done before. And you're basically asking I'd say every center on your roster to do more than they've ever done before. And that's for that position with that kind of responsibility and the players that they're replacing, it's a huge ask. And that leads into a next topic. And I was watching NHL Network this morning with my son before we went to camp, and it was Jamison Coyle and Mike Rupp, and they were sort of rehashing some things, some rumors, some discussions, some all this stuff from the summer. And one of the things that Rupper brought up was Mark Scheifele on the Bruins, and they even had the line charts out with Scheifele as the top line center for the Bruins. By the way, they had Jesper Boquist as the fourth line center on their line projections, which was interesting. Patrick Brown was nowhere to be found. That's probably why I forgot to even mention him when I was talking about center candidate, even though he's in there. And I think he's a good penalty killer, face-off guy. Like, there's things that he brings to the table that may bring value to a winning hockey team. But they talked about Scheifele going to the Bruins, and if that's going to get revisited now or during the season. And obviously they talked about a goalie going the other way, and Linus Ullmark was the guy again that they talked about getting shipped to Winnipeg, which would of course be the carousel of Hellebuck also going somewhere as well. That would be a lot of dominoes to fall. Is that something that you see as a possibility? I mean, I know Scheifele obviously is a top-notch offensive player. He's still at an age where he can produce prodigious offensive numbers. I like what he would bring as far as being able to play with the top wingers that the Bruins have and give you, the kind of offensive production you were getting with Patrice Bergeron when he was here. But you're also going to take a step back defensively. I don't think there's any question about that. He's not a two-way center like Bergeron was, or even David Krejci was for that matter. And also, I continue to want to avoid Winnipeg Jets players just because of the cloud that's been over that team for the last 2 or 3 years. Rick Bowness lost his mind at the end of the playoffs last spring when they were eliminated, basically, intimating the players around him were not, we're quitting, we're not competing. Like, he was frustrated with them. Paul Maurice basically quit on the team and then went to Florida and took them to the Stanley Cup final last year. And a lot of the comments that he was complimentary that Maurice was making about the Florida Panthers, about the players taking control of the room, about all that stuff, I also felt was kind of a backhanded slap at the Winnipeg Jets and what he'd been dealing with before he went to Florida. And Scheifele is absolutely in the middle of that mix as one of their best players. So there's trouble signs. There's things I don't like about it, but beggars can't be choosers if you're the Bruins, and it turns into a thing where they absolutely need a legit NHL number one center, and that's the best guy available. You may have to do a deal with the devil. I don't even want to think about the extension that may come with that if they had to trade for a player like that and give up value for him. But is that something that you see as a possibility? Is that something you like? And if not, who is your guy on the radar, off the radar, been discussed, not discussed, that you think would be the great target for the Bruins to go after as a potential number one to bring in from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, I think you're going to hit the nail on the head with deal with the devil when it comes with Scheifele in terms of listen, the Bruins are desperate in terms of having a capable top six center, and Mark Scheifele is that. And I think you look at where that value is, I think it comes with just, I think, the positive domino effect of just having a guy that you can slot in there and how much he pushes guys further down the lineup. Probably Coyle in a pinch can hold to a top six spot. We saw it in the playoffs, but over 82 games, asking a lot for a guy, right? The domino effect of having some of these guys slide back into roles where they're more catered to is huge. But if you're, investing in a guy like Scheifele to step into that role, yes, he's a guy who's coming off a 40-goal season, can drive play, put him with Pastrňák, probably get good results. But when you look at just the other kind of warning signs there, whether it's the defensive game where, if he's your guy next to Marchand and DeBrusk or Pastrňák, it's an offense-only line, right? You all of a sudden you have, obviously it's a big departure going from Bergeron to a line like that. Yeah, exactly. But especially like that, where you're going from top, two-way grouping to a group that pretty much is going to be trading chances down the ice, and that's also including what exactly is a Pavel Zacha line going to be as well, when they were kind of the same offensive-oriented kind of grouping there as well. So you're sacrificing more defense, which if you look at the way this team is built, it's kind of going to have to be your foundation this year in terms of, your success has to be rooted in defense and goaltending. I think the mantra or the talk about the Winnipeg Jets in the locker room, pretty concerning. It's one thing if it was just one player, but it seemed like it's just a stench kind of following that team. And again, you can preach all about the Bruins, culture and what they have, but introducing that as kind of your savior or your another big addition, I feel like it's not something exactly you want to do with this team that's already kind of going through a bit of a transition. Yes, they still have guys like Marchand. They talk about guys like, McAvoy and Pastrňák who've been there for a while, but still adding this other voice into the room that has a lot of narrative surrounding him. Not a huge fan of that. Again, beggars can't be choosers, but I think if you're the Bruins, whether it's, waiting for more around the trade deadline when hopefully things should open up more and teams aren't as, stuck against the cap, or teams are holding on to assets more, or just, punting and waiting until next offseason when, a guy like Elias Lindholm, who I think is probably the ideal target. Again, you run the risk of like focusing in on these soon to be unrestricted free agents, and who the hell knows happens between now and then in terms of whether they get traded, sign elsewhere, what have you. But I think that's a guy that if you're investing in the next piece, no one's going to replace Patrice Bergeron, but if you find a guy that's a very capable two-way center that can give you 60, 70 points, can anchor a top six role, those should be the guys you're investing in, as opposed to a guy like Scheifele, who can score you 40 goals, will also probably be in the ice for 40 goals against. I just feel like it's not a guy worth investing in that spot. But
hey, everybody, football season is just about to kick off, and what better place is there to go than FanDuel Sportsbook? Our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. They give you the chance to win all season long while the football is getting carried around, thrown in the end zone, kicked through the uprights, and all the gambling people can come out, all the fantasy people can come out and let it roll. Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win during the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl. That's right. Pick a team right now that you think is going to win the Super Bowl. Could it be the Patriots? Could it be Bill Belichick's swan song Super Bowl victory? Who knows? Maybe you throw some money at that. But right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you get bonus bets every time they win during the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, on player props, over-unders, and so much more. So just visit FanDuel.com/Boston and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/Boston, and get going with the football wagers. You know you want to, just go do it.
Well, this is why I feel like the trade deadline is the right time to do it, or mid-season, even if it's a little bit before the deadline. And Sweeney has done a good job. Don Sweeney has done a good job of, preemptively making deals sometimes ahead of the deadline, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, even, to get ahead of all the, the fracas that happens right around the actual trade deadline. But like we've seen this in recent past, trades for Taylor Hall, signs him to an extension. Trades for Hampus Lindholm, signs him to an extension. I think this could be part of the plan for the Bruins, and the game plan this year is to go into the season, take a few months. Maybe you're asking more out of guys than they're capable of over a long term, but at least get a few months into the season, see what you have. And then, potentially Lindholm, potentially Scheifele, maybe even, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is available from the Edmonton Oilers. But there's some guys out there that maybe they're available and you can go and make that deal. Now, obviously, Nugent-Hopkins is signed for a long time, so that's kind of a different category. But Lindholm and Scheifele, those are guys, rental players you could bring in and do the same thing with them that you did with Lindholm and Hall, where you trade, bring them in. Maybe you give up a little bit more because there's an idea that they may stay in Boston, and it's not necessarily a rental, quote unquote, a pure rental. And but you bring them in and they become the answer for the next 3 to 4 years, which buys you some time to figure out your internal answer, your long-term answer, your guy that's going to be the next Patrice Bergeron, whether you draft and develop or target somebody and trade for them. But, I do feel like Sweeney has shown us one of the things he's good at is targeting rental guys in the last year of their deals, trading for them when it's a need, and then making sure that all their ducks are in a row for the extension, when they come in. And as long as it's a good fit, you see that happen and they become a part of the Bruins fold. So I could see something like that happening with a legit frontline center to bring them in. They just need to make sure that the guy's the right fit. And I'm with you. Lindholm, I think, is much more a Boston Bruins player than Scheifele, especially for what they're going to be asking for a top center to play in all situations, to play a 200-foot game, to potentially kill penalties, win faceoffs, in addition to producing offensively. And it's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing goes down. But I do think at the end of the day, they're probably going to need one of those guys at some point in this year. There's going to be a come to Jesus moment with this Bruins team when they say we're just not getting what we need out of the center position and we need to go get somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where this team, the way they're built, can hang in, win 2-1 games, but you're going to have way too many of those games where I think it's going to be, tight contests and just not having the offensive firepower or of asking too much of a guy like Coyle or even Zacha to continually get the most out of the kind of the talent they're surrounded with. So I think it's going to come at some point. I think for Don Sweeney, it's all about just, being patient, seeing what's out there and letting this market kind of develop. I think it's been a trend kind of all throughout this offseason of teams just don't have the financial leeway or they're too, hesitant to move on from prospects, that if you wait until the middle of the season when teams get desperate, teams are looking to finally make a move, part ways with guys. That's when hopefully the market picks up. And whether it's a guy like Lindholm, as you said, or, I think that's the guy that makes the most sense. But again, I'm sure the Bruins covet him, but sure do a whole bunch of other teams will probably value a guy like him more than a guy like Scheifele. So that's also the part of the battle is the Bruins always talk about, this is the year finally they stop moving assets, they stop moving future draft capital or what have you. Might have to do it one more time if it gets to a guy like Lindholm, which again, you kind of have to weigh that price. But considering that kind of the main missing piece in terms of building a sustainable roster as part of this kind of retool they have in the post-Bergeron era, you desperately need a top-line center somewhere in the mix there.
Enjoying seeing snippets of the summer of Pastrňák that we're getting through social media here.
Yes.
He was in Prague for a soccer game, leading the rowdy hooligans in the crowd and in chants, and then apparently buying an entire round of drinks for everybody in his section or whatever was going on there. But we're seeing bits and pieces of Pastrňák's summer here, whether it's pushing the baby carriage in Boston and seeing Milan Lucic or this. That it seems like he's having a great summer and he's going to be in a good frame of mind come September when training camp rolls around.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's like an annual tradition. I think it was last year he was at like a tennis match and he was, or I think it was a soccer match in Prague and he was partying there too. I feel like that's, again, it's one of the signs of the season's almost here. It's like late August, Paz's doing his annual tour around Prague and enjoying life and getting ready for the new season. And he's going to have to be a guy that is going to be the focal point of your offense. Rather evident with a guy coming off of a 61-goal season, but you're going to need him to pretty much be driving play. If he either takes a step back or injuries, what have you, hit with him, then all of a sudden you're in a spot where I don't even know what you are. You're like a worse version of the Islanders. Your defense based on goaltending, but you don't have enough firepower to really win you some of those tight contests. So it's going to be, he's going to be probably the most important player going into this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I didn't realize the stat until I saw it on the NHL Network the other day. 34 more goals than anybody else in the Bruins last year for Pastrňák, which really illustrates just how much he carried them offensively at times last year. And I think it could be an even wider gap this year. Yeah. Maybe not because Marchand's, a year and a half, 2 years removed from the double hip surgery, and maybe he'll have a little more, oomph to score goals than he did at points last year when he went through some valleys scoring wise. I've asked everybody that's been on the last, month or so this question. And this may be a loaded question for you because of your BU ties. But who do you see as the who's going to wear the C for the Boston Bruins and why? I've long held that I think it's Marchand, should be Marchand. He's the logical choice. He's the only holdover, if you don't count Milan Lucic coming back from the 2011 Stanley Cup team. He's the only guy that's won. He certainly will feel, I think, the most responsibility and the most accountability to carry on the mantle that Patrice Bergeron, the leadership mantle that he had, and carry on everything that Patrice Bergeron built here. I think a lot of guys would take that seriously, but I think Marchand would take it most seriously and take it most to heart. And take it most seriously. So that would be my guy. But, obviously McAvoy's a candidate. Pastrňák, I think, certainly deserves consideration and a lot of discussion. I think all three of them are going to wear letters regardless of who gets the captaincy. And maybe it's going to be overplayed a little bit who gets the C because they're all going to be equal leaders in most respects. But who do you believe is the captaincy and where do you think the Bruins are leaning in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a guy like McAvoy makes plenty of sense long-term, but I think when you look at just the state of this team and the kind of the era they're in now where they're transitioning from this 2 decades long, luxury of having a guy like Bergeron and Chara and these guys are such, commanding presences in the dressing room to still have that kind of last piece there with Marchand in terms of being that bridging those kind of differing eras you're in kind of now. I think that's really important. As you said, he's still a guy that if anyone was going to take seriously the mantle and the responsibility of learning from being that next guy after Bergeron and carrying on that tradition, it's a guy who's kind of been stapled to his hip in Marchand over the years, right? Like This is a guy that I think takes that very seriously, will always be the first one to tell you how much Bergeron means to him and the impact he's had. And I think he's a guy that, you even look at, previous dev camps, usually it's Marchand, the guy who's talking to these guys about what they need to do, follow by example, work out in the gym, all these things that, I think he's a guy that can kind of lead the way in that regard. He's an emotional leader, but has I think Bruce Cassidy is the one that's always mentioned why he's a natural fit for a leader, because he holds everyone to a very high standard. And as this Bruins team that's kind of going into the unknown with this post Bergeron Krejci era, I think having a guy who's been there, done that, has been part of this era, has more or less been Bergeron's understudy for over a decade now. I think having him as the C, I think, is the important kind of next step there. And yes, he's 35. Who knows how long he'd have that for? But Bergeron also wore the C for 3 years too. Like in terms of, I think, what that role is and that responsibility as you're, wading into this next chapter of the Bruins, I think having a guy like him as that commanding authority still makes the most sense. McAvoy and Pastrňák, they will get their chances as they're not going away anytime soon. But I think for right now in this moment, I think Marchand's the, far and away best choice there in that regard.
Yeah. And look, to your point, McAvoy, his time is going to come to wear the C. There's no question about it. I think Marchand's only signed for like 2 years this year and next year, I believe. So he probably is not going to play beyond that. Maybe I'm not going to count him out. Maybe, he's one of those, like, they're going to have to rip the shirt off my back kind of guys as far as retirement goes. But he's going to be 36, 37 at that point. Like that, that may be it for him. And then the C goes on to somebody else after that. So we're not talking about a long-term captaincy here. I just think the natural way of things would be Bergeron passing to Marchand, then Marchand passing to Pastrňák or McAvoy. And let's, full disclosure, let's be honest about Marchand. 10 years ago, would we have ever entertained him being captain material for the Boston Bruins? No way. He's obviously grown up, evolved, matured, learned from Patrice Bergeron. I think a lot of what Bergeron has rubbed off on Marchand and kind of brought him more to center from when he was way out, being a radical poop stirrer for large portions of his career. And he's gone away from that to a large degree because I think he realizes how much it hurts the team. And he wants to be a team guy. So that part of it, is obviously there now where he's matured into that sort of role and being considered. I think some people may completely discount him immediately because they look at his past and say, how can this guy be captain when he's done, been suspended a billion times, had to write over $1 million in game checks to the NHL for suspensions and fines, all that stuff, lick the guy's face twice, all that stuff. But I also think there's another part of it too, where I think there was some wariness maybe earlier in his career that he was almost too hard on the young guys and that he was, not as patient with them as they were coming up and trying to break in. And I think that's changed too. Ed, to your point, coming in and talking to the younger guys, the prospects at development camp. I think as he's gotten older, he's gotten better about that and sort of walked the line of being demanding and accountable and holding everybody else accountable, but also understanding that you can't be too hard on young guys that are still sort of building themselves up and breaking in and sort of going away from a little bit of the old school, you're gonna have to prove to us that you've earned it, and then we'll ease up on you a little bit. So that's a huge component to being captain too, is to integrating young players, creating that welcoming dressing room that Patrice Bergeron has really created over the years, and Zdeno Chara too, who would not have hazing, did not even want to use the word rookie, was really good about that stuff. So I think in some ways too, some people's perceptions have to change about Marchand a little bit and finally evolve the way the players evolve to view him as captain material, which people like you and I that have been around him, for a long duration and have been in the dressing room understand and see every day how much of a leader and sort of a captain kind of guy he is to begin with anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where I feel if he gets named captain, most of the vitriol will probably come from, I feel it's Toronto and these other markets. Yeah, that's where it'll come from. And I think for Bruins fans, the only possible hang-up is probably just that argument of long term, should you give it to him over McAvoy? That's the only argument I could see Bruins fans having, which you want to focus on that, you can. I still think it's kind of a non-issue, but I think Marchand, in terms of leading by example, how good he is working with younger players. Like, I feel like the thing that always sticks out with me with Marchand, when you talk about, a guy that gets called up from Providence or a younger player that has a really good game or two, like last year, even talked about a guy like Lauko. I think for him, we're coming from his kind of career trajectory of being this guy that was kind of a grinding player, started on the fourth line and kind of built his way up. I think he knows what patience is needed. He identifies what guys who are really committed to working on their craft need to do to take that next step. Like, every time you talk to him about these younger players, I always feel like he has a very patient, fresh perspective on that. I think you kind of need that for especially this team that is probably going to have to show out a lot of patience for some of these younger players. They try to carve out roles in this lineup. So I think he's a guy that really makes a lot of sense in terms of being that kind of that conduit of leadership for these younger players who are hopefully making that next jump up to the NHL ranks this upcoming season.
All right, before we get to the Twitter question of the week, which is a new segment I completely just invented here in this episode. If you be proud you were on for the birth of this, Conor.
Thank you, Joe.
24th episode, I believe, of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Anything that you're working on, anything that you're hot about, anything you want to talk about, Bruins or NHL related, that's kind of been on your mind that you haven't really been able to talk about, on a podcast or anything else, right at this second, in the complete dead portion of the NHL offseason, where everybody's at their cottage and still going to soccer games and partying it up right now before captain's practice opens.
Yeah, it's been a slow part of the summer. And I think my most exciting thing last week, I went to the Savannah Bananas game in Brockton. that was the highlight of my week, Joe. So it's been pretty slow. I think for me, the only other thing is just looking ahead to next season. People want to look at the fact that the Bruins have a whole bunch of cap space, have a lot more, fiscal flexibility to hopefully aggressively retool with a pretty solid foundation you have with this team, especially defense, goaltending, what have you. I still think Jake DeBrusk is the other, big piece that not only for next year in terms of whether or not you want to extend him, and you look at just what Brendan Hagel got, that could be a barometer of what you probably have to pay him if you want to retain him long term. But he's a guy that you view Pastrňák, he's got to be the conduit of your offense. But I think you have to see whether or not a guy like Jake DeBrusk at the wing, without a set, proven top line center kind of driving play with him, whether he can be a guy that can drive play, because he's a guy, you look at his skill set and when he's on, he's driving to the net and he's generating high danger looks, grade A chances. He should be a guy that kind of whoever you put with him, if he's playing his game, should generate chances. Like if Nick Ritchie, who can kind of just park himself in the net front, can fall backwards into 15 goals a season, you think Jake DeBrusk, with how aggressive he is, can be a guy that can consistently give you 30 goals regardless where you put him into the lineup. So
yeah,
as much as I think people look at the new additions, like what Lucic can do in a fourth line role, what Morgan Geek can do with more minutes, JVR, what he has left in the tank, I think internally of guys who are coming back, DeBrusk is, I think, going to be a key piece, because I think we know Pastrňák, you can pencil him in for at least 40 goals. I think he's that good of a player. You can have that expectation. DeBrusk, is this going to be where he breaks through at 30 goals? And if so, can he do it kind of off of his own merit as opposed to maybe being an important piece of a line with Marchand and Bergeron? I think if you get another step forward from him in his game, not only will it, one, get him a really nice contract, it goes a long way towards giving you another at least proven offensive conduit on this team that is lacking that kind of proven goal-scoring touch beyond a guy like Pastrňák right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think we did see progression from him last year as far as consistency, as far as going hard to the net, as far as, trying to do things even when the puck wasn't going in or he wasn't necessarily generating as much as you thought he should, where he would be more of a factor. And there were times I saw him taking the body on forechecks and, competing harder for pucks in those sort of situations where, under Cassidy the last few years, it was fly by city every single time. And that was good to see. And I think that is a sign that maybe he's continuing to get to that place. And, but there's no doubt that given when they traded Taylor Hall, everybody else on wing that has talent and offensive ability, that was a bat signal to them. You're going to need to step up and produce a lot, because there's going to be, there's only so many guys that have 30 goal potential on the wing on that team, on that roster right now, as we speak. It's Marchand, it's DeBrusk, and it's Pastrňák, obviously. And I think when you get beyond those guys, I don't see 30 goal potential out of any of those other guys. So yeah, he definitely needs to step. I mean, and financially their motivation is there, right? Like,
Right.
it's right there in front of him. If he can really step up and produce, either the Bruins or somebody else are going to pay big time for his services. So, last year I looked at as a step in the right direction for him, but there's no question he's a big X factor guy going into this year, and a guy that they're going to need to drive play a lot, especially if Pavel Zacha or Charlie Coyle is your number one center. All right. CosmicDad.eth is the Twitter account. And his question is there even room for Alex Chiasson on this roster? They really don't want to give Lauko, Steen, McLaughlin, Beecher, Lysell, etc. a chance, eh? And you could, and look, I found it funny when we were in Nashville talking to Cam Neely, talking to Don Sweeney, and Cam, I remember at one point is like, hey, maybe this is the year we just need to pass it over to the rookies, or pass it over to the young guys. Talking about like the salary cap and the difficulties they were going to have and all this other stuff and trading Taylor Hall. But it was obvious they had a game plan. They were bringing in a bunch of veterans. They knew what they were doing. It was kind of that, that sheepish smile on their face, like the Cheshire Cat smile, like they knew they had a game plan in mind. They were not going to hand anything off to any of these young guys. Lauko, I think, will probably be on this team. Like, I think he proved last year that he can play in the NHL level, that he can certainly play like a fourth line role, and that I think there's still growth.
I think there's room to grow, yeah.
Especially offensively and his skill set wise and the way that he plays. I think he's one of those guys that has upward mobility from, being a fourth line guy. But beyond that, these other guys, Steen, McLaughlin, Beecher, Lysell, et cetera, Merkulov, the other guy that we talked about a little bit earlier, I don't want to hand it over to these guys. I don't want to pencil in these guys into an NHL roster to start the year and say, we're putting all our eggs in this guy's basket and this guy is it. And, and if he's not it, we're going to start shuffling this carousel of young players in until we find somebody that can do it. That's not the way the Bruins have ever done it. That's not the way they want to do it. They want to bring in an NHL player that's proven that they can do it in the past and has the pedigree, and force that young guy to push them out and to earn the spot. Like Cam Neely and Don Sweeney were NHL players. They understood that was what it was like when they were an NHL player. Is you're not going to win a spot until you've beaten out a veteran for that spot and earned it in training camp, earned it in the season, whenever. And that's the natural sort of cycle of life in the NHL. And they want to continue that with the Bruins, and they've done that. And I think that's the right way to go. I don't want to hand it to anybody that's a young player unless they've already proven, like Lauko has at the NHL level, that he's earned it. And it seems that they continue to do it that way. So I know there's tons of Bruins fans that Dev Camp rolls around. They get all excited about the prospects. And look, I love Riley Duran as much as anybody else. Very good player. I think he's going to be an NHL player. Yeah. But we're talking about guys that are in college, guys that are 18 years old, some of them. We're talking about guys that are light years away from the NHL. And I went back and went through every Dev Camp roster for the last 12 years or whatever. And there's at max 4 or 5 guys that make the NHL from those Dev Camps. And that's it. And a lot of them you never hear or see from again. So I don't want there to be room on the roster for these guys, and I'd rather load up and have insurance policies like Alex Chiasson, and then have these guys have to force them out to get their job.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point of we're in the dog days of the summer, Haggs, right? Where it's you look and people are mapping out their lineups, and of course they want to pencil in a guy like Merkulov in a middle six role of being like a guy that you hope can give you 40 points out of nowhere and building off of that, or Johnny Beecher, who's really kind of struggled to put it all together in Providence. Man, if he gets going to the NHL level, you got your 4-seeded future there. It's one thing to hope these guys can take that step forward, but they got to prove it. And I think, as you said, if you're the Bruins and you're looking at, leaving no stone unturned, having these veterans in place not only gives you an insurance policy, but it also puts the onus on these younger guys to prove it. And I think Lauko is a perfect example, right? I think going to camp last year, I don't think anyone penciled him in. I don't, almost like he was one of those guys that seemed like his time in Providence had peaked and was kind of on his way out. All right, we kind of know he's a good skater. We'll see what he can kind of bring. But
even when he was on the opening night roster, I think, or the NHL roster to start the year, I think we all kind of looked at each other like, "What is this, like a salary cap thing? Why is this guy here? I don't understand this." Right. But you saw what you ended up seeing, what the Bruins saw over the course of games and over the course of his time, and came to realize, okay, they absolutely saw him popping in camp and outplaying these other guys, and that's why he's here now. And he showed it, and we finally caught on to what the Bruins had been seeing throughout training camp.
Right. And so, if you're the Bruins, and if you are high on a guy like Merkulov, and he has, more offensive ceiling than maybe other guys in your system. But if he doesn't, show that during preseason action, or is a guy that still needs time. I mean, I feel like the book on Merkulov, we even talked about it. It was like the running theme of Dev Camp last summer, where it was everyone talking about how good offensively he was. Every single coach we talked to was like, got to work on his defensive game, which like I didn't see how he was that first year in Providence. It must have been outrageous because I don't know what he was doing in the D zone that had everyone talking about that, but he's an unfinished product, and that's what you expect from some of these younger players. So if you can put it all together and make a sustained push during camp and during preseason action, great. Like, you'll take that if you're the Bruins. It's a good problem to have if these younger players are pushing out these veterans you brought in as well. But it should never be a situation, unless you're a team that is the bottom of the barrel, is going to not be a realistic contender at all. Those are teams that can afford to throw a guy into the fire and have them learn on the fly and go through the bumps and bruises that come with adjusting to the NHL game. Bruins are still trying to field a competitive roster as they're trying to see what the right fit is for this team moving forward. And putting a guy like Merkulov in the middle six at the start of on October 11th isn't the best in terms of putting him in the best spot to succeed. It's not putting your team in the best spot either if you have this guy who's going to be a liability in the D zone, is not feeling confident in his game. I think that was the big thing with like Studnicka, who ended up not being like an NHL level player, but that's also a guy you don't want to throw into a role where he's overwhelmed, is not feeling confident, and all of a sudden is finding himself kind of in a rut early on. If you're the Bruins, you want these guys playing at their best, feeling confident, feeling poised, ready that they can take on an NHL role, and just handing it to them going into camp. That's not the best way to do it at all.
So basically you're saying this ain't Arizona, Connor. We're not just throwing young players into the mix. And
we're not playing at a arena smaller than a Gannis or Connie Forum. No, we're not doing any of that stuff. Thank God. So
no, we're not playing in an arena named after mullets. That is definitely not what's going on.
It's a step forward. Yes.
Boston.com's Connor Ryan. Thank you very much. I also want to thank our sponsors real quick one more time. FanDuel Sportsbook. Football season is upon us. Go to FanDuel.com/Boston and check them out. They will hook you up with no sweat bets. And also America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, Factor Meals, right here. Delicious. Put them in the micro for 2 minutes. If you're still having a busy summer, you're still running around, taking kids to summer camp, all that stuff, this will get you a lunch or a dinner real quick. Thank you very much to Factor Meals. Connor, this was fun. Let's do this again, my friend.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
Thank you, buddy. All right. We'll see you at the rink. Thanks for listening to Pucks with Haggs podcast.
CLNS Media Network is powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston and start earning bonus bets when you bet on a Super Bowl winner. You can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season.